Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
I always tell you how I'm doing. It's time for you to tell me how you're doing.
Since you asked, and I believe you are sincere, well, Tom, I went out to the car this morning and the car didn't start. So the battery is dead. It was going to happen, running the car like twice a week now. Eventually something was going to happen. So, yes, not only has the entire world gone to heck, there's the economy is a disaster. Ad rates on the internet are at an all-time low. And now I'm even more stuck in my house than I was before when all of this went down. So I'm doing great, Tom. Thank you for asking.
I appreciate your honesty.
Do you? So I figured today's show, let's talk some recruiting. Let's just get into it and let's just talk about it, especially with the commitment on Wednesday from IMG defensive end Tunmise Adeleye, who is originally from Texas. Tom, how was that pronunciation?
That was good. It's I have it. I spelled it phonetically as Tunmise Adeleye, which is pretty, I think that's basically exactly what you said. So pretty good. But
I can't. I don't know if I put the question mark on top of it at the end of it, like I'm not supposed to do. So yeah, the number 41 player in the 24/7 composite. 24/7 lists him at 6'3", 240, but if you look at his film, he looks like he's more along the lines of what ESPN lists him at. I think is 265. Maybe not unlike Darian Henry in that regard, who just looks heavier than he was listed at. Although that's once Darian Henry got to Ohio State, he's much lighter and lost some weight. But this gives Ohio State now, Tom, 11 top 100 players of their 16 commits in the 24/7 composite. Adeleye is now their, like I said, the number 41 player overall, the number 4 strong side defensive end, the number 8 player in his state. And I'm not sure if that state is Florida in these rankings. I believe it is rather than Texas. But he is the only the 5th highest ranked player in Ohio State's class right now, which just another sign of how ridiculous Ryan Day's class is going at this point.
Yeah, you keep thinking like, okay, well, they've got as many, real high level players as they're going to get. So they'll fill it out with some high 3-star, low 4-star guys, and it'll be a really good class. And they just keep bringing in top 100 recruits and top 50 recruits. And yeah, it is pretty remarkable what's going on right now with this class. Cause you said he's the number 8 player in the state of Florida, and he's only the number 5 player in this class so far. So it's like if you had every recruit in the state of Florida and they all came to Ohio State, you would still not have a substantially better class than this one on average. Like it's insane. And there are we'll get into some of the what's next coming up later, but yeah, there's not only is the class continuing to grow, but there's indications that there's some bigger stuff on the horizon potentially as well.
Yeah, and just looking at Ohio State's class right now, you mentioned Adeleye being the number 8 player in Florida. So Jack Sawyer, they've got a commitment from defensive end, the number 1 player in Ohio. Travion Henderson, the running back out of Virginia, the number 3 player in that state. Quarterback Kyle McCord out of Philly, he's the number 2 player out of Pennsylvania. Donovan Jackson, the guard, is the number 5 player out of Texas. Marvin Harrison, Kyle McCord's teammate, is the number 5 player out of Pennsylvania. And then cornerback Ja'Kalen Johnson, the number 1 player in Missouri. Receiver Jaden Ballard, number 2 player in Ohio. Reed Carrico, linebacker from Ironton, the number 3 player in Ohio. Evan Pryor, the running back out of North Carolina, the number 4 player in that state. Andre Turrentine, number 3 player in Tennessee, who is the, just counting, I think is the number 13 player in Ohio State's class. is the number 5 overall safety. And the numbers just continue. Like Sam Hart, the tight end, number 4 player in Colorado. It's Colorado. We'll give you that. But the being ranked so highly in state is just a continuance of what we've talked about with the widening gap between Michigan and Ohio State, where Ohio State has so many more of these guys than anybody else in the Big Ten, more than Michigan and Penn State combined in terms of top 10 players in state, or I'm sorry, top 10 players at their position. But then you look in state and it mirrors that as well. Just the sheer numbers. And there's probably, I don't know, what are we thinking, Tom? 25 players going to be in this class, I think is probably what you shoot for. And they've got 16 so far. There will probably be a decommitment or two just because that's what happens. So say there's another 10 guys that you're going to add to this class. And I saw somebody say with I think Rivals rankings perhaps, this class, a 16-person class, would have already ranked, number 6 overall last year. So, maybe this Ryan Day knows what he's doing.
I mean, possibly. We'll see. There is, you mentioned decommitments, and that's I think, more of a possibility this year, just based on some of the uncertainty right now. If guys are, if there's no season, or guys don't play their senior year, or there's so much uncertainty in the world that guys may not want to go to school as far from home. That's a possibility. But yeah, if they keep the bulk of this class together and add some of the names that are considered more or less locks at this point, you're talking about not just the greatest class in Ohio State history, but arguably or possibly the greatest class in college football recruiting history. They've got 16 commits, 3 5-stars, 11 4-stars. That is the rest of the Big Ten. They have 3 5-stars. The rest of the Big Ten only has 1. And they have 11 4-stars, and Wisconsin, Michigan, Penn State combined only have 11. They have the same number as Wisconsin, Michigan, and Penn State combined in 4-stars. It's just the gap between Ohio State and Wisconsin in total points right now is 289.96. So basically 290 to just shy of 160. So they're like 130 points up on Wisconsin, almost double Wisconsin. And, from Wisconsin down to Rutgers, which is 2nd through 7th in the conference, it's 159 to 144. So it's a 15-point gap from 2 to 7 and a 130-point gap from 1 to 2. It's remarkable. The average Ohio State is, Michigan has an average recruit ranking of just over 90, basically 90.17 right now. They're the only Big Ten team that has an average recruit ranking of 90 or better. Ohio State's is 95.58. Like everyone else is kind of huddled in the 88, 88, 86, 88, 85, 89, 89, 84, 84, 83, 85, 83. Like everyone else is like 83 to 90, and Ohio State is 95. And they have 16 guys committed already. And they're expected to add a couple more. Like it's just, they are so far ahead of the rest of the conference right now. It's, you're getting into like what would it take for them to not win the conference one of these years? Global pandemic? Yeah, really, like if there isn't a season, Ohio State won't be the 2020 Big Ten champions. So yeah, but it's like, barring an absolutely shocking upset in the conference championship game, or just an incredible string of luck for someone, like it's just Ohio State is probably going to be the prohibitive favorite in the Big Ten for the foreseeable future. Right now, Ohio State has 11 top 100 players in the composite. The rest of the Big Ten has 4. 2 of them belong to Michigan. I think one is Penn State, one is Maryland. You look at rivals in the top 103, there are 12 Buckeyes and 5 others from the Big Ten, including 3 from Michigan. And as you alluded to, Tom, Ohio State isn't going to end up
with just 11 top 100 players. I saw Steve Wiltfong from 24/7, their director of recruiting, director of scouting, put out an article the other day about where some of the top uncommitted players are leaning. And the first few of those names, like, let's talk about Washington defensive tackle JT Tuimoloau, who is the number 2 player overall in the composites. I think he's the number 1 player overall in 24/7's own rankings. Defensive, he's listed here as he's a strong side defensive end / defensive tackle. And he is the former teammate of G. Scott, the freshman wide receiver. For me, he's one of those guys where it would just be too good to be true for Ohio State to be able to lure him in. And this is the time of year where you start to imagine things in terms of the possibilities. And, you bring him in, Jack Sawyer's already there. And then you look at some of the other guys, Washington receiver Emeka Egbuka, who is possibly also leaning to Ohio State, as according to Steve Wiltfong. And Egbuka is the number 9 player in the nation, the number 1 wide receiver, just a crazy playmaker, 6'1", 190, number 9 player, like I said, overall. Those two guys, that might be if Ohio State were to land those two guys out of Washington, I might have to go back and research and try to figure out what is the biggest recruiting coup in Ohio State history, something like this. Not that these two are a package or they're teammates or anything, but you grab 2 5-star guys out of Washington. Give me something comparable, and I'm not asking you to give me something comparable off the top of your head, but we know the crazy levels of recruiting that Urban Meyer did. I don't know if there's an equivalent of this, although I will say, like, grabbing Noah Spence out of Pennsylvania days after taking the job, basically, in 2012 was pretty impressive. But I don't know if Urban Meyer has ever been able to do this. Not that Ryan Day has, but if he does, that's going to be up there with anything, any coach, any kind of recruiting coup that we have seen, in my opinion.
The one that springs immediately to mind is getting Jeff Okudah and J.K. Dobbins out of Texas in 2017. Dobbins wasn't a 5-star, but
Baron Browning was.
Baron Browning was. Well, that's right. That was the same class. Yeah, those 3 guys all out of Texas. Right.
So I stand corrected.
Well, I mean, that has worked out pretty darn well, because that was 2 5-stars and a high 4-star. But it's certainly up there, and and Texas is a state where Ohio State has a little bit of a history, and Washington is a state where before Guy Scott came, they had not had a scholarship player from the state of Washington since Kevin Griffin was last on the team in 1998. So yeah, it's been a minute, but the formula there is the same. I mean, this is the same thing as when they went into Georgia and got Von Bell. And who else did they pull out of Georgia when Mark Richt was kind of stumbling a little bit? They pulled
Raekwon McMillan.
Raekwon McMillan is yep, and Trey Johnson, who was really highly ranked but got hurt and never got to play. But it's the formula is the same. In 2014, when they were doing all that stuff with Raekwon McMillan and Von Bell and bringing those guys in, same thing with Texas in 2017 in getting those guys. When the local schools are kind of falling off or in transition or just kind of stumbling a little bit, that's when you can kind of swoop in and it becomes a little more palatable for guys to go, you know what, I think I'm going to go play somewhere else. And you're seeing that in California right now too. Ohio State's having a good amount of success in California, as is Clemson right now, because USC and UCLA are kind of stumbling around. Well, Washington and Washington State both have new coaches this year, so this is a good time to go in there and once you get one guy and he's having a good experience, then it's not so hard to convince his teammate that maybe he wants to follow. So yeah, they're being opportunistic and they're making the most of those opportunities.
That's a really good point too with the turnover there. Although Washington is kind of has just handed it over, not to a new guy, just the new head coach being the former offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator.
Defensive. Jimmy Lake, the former defensive coordinator.
Right.
Yep.
So at least it's a familiar person, but you don't know the track record necessarily of what his program is going to look like. And there is more of a track record with Ryan Day. So that will be something to watch. And from the way people talk, it's, Washington has some work to do. Now, the good thing is, Tom, we're all under quarantine, so they can't. The good thing for Washington, like nobody can go traveling and seeing all of these different places. But again, as Ryan Day said this past week when he was asked if should there be a tweak to the early signing day, and he's like, no, you don't have to sign on early signing day. Just leave it the way it is. Nobody's forcing you to sign. Just we'll sign in February if things are moving too quickly. And this would be a situation where you get some visits in, and I think, like you said, this will also see some decommitments perhaps once those visits are allowed and players start looking other places and taking other visits. And I'm not just saying decommitments for Ohio State. I think we might see more this year because people are committing essentially sight unseen other than the virtual visits or the visits from last year. But yeah, for me, I think getting those two kids out of Washington is even more impressive than the Baron Browning, Jeff Okudah, J.K. Dobbins, because there has been a history with Texas, and there really hasn't been with Washington in the past. You wouldn't even look out that far, and maybe now there's a reason to, and there's interest as well. So those are two guys. 24/7 did their rankings, really updated their own rankings this past week, and they moved the J.C. Latham, an offensive lineman from IMG, who is a teammate with Ohio State's newest commit, Tunmise Adeleye. They moved him from wherever he was all the way up to the number 3 player overall in the nation. So he is now a 5-star. He is heavily expected to be a Buckeye. Looking at his crystal ball, there are 11 crystal ball projections for J.C. Latham, and they are all pointed at Ohio State. 6'6", 305. And the composite, he's the number 36 player overall, the number 6 offensive tackle. I don't know if the composite has been updated yet to reflect this move from the 24/7's own rankings, but 24/7, they have him the number 3 player overall, the number 1 offensive tackle, the number 1 player in Florida. And if you're not familiar with the composite and the difference between the 24/7 composite and the 24/7 rankings, the composite just takes basically rivals ESPN and 24/7 and does some math and gives you an average basically for everybody. And it's a pretty accurate rundown of how the recruiting industry sees an individual player. But J.C. Latham, I wrote his commitment piece maybe a month or so ago. So we expect at some point for him to be a Buckeye. And then if Ohio State were to land Latham, the 2 kids from Washington, and they already have Jack Sawyer, who is the number 4 player in 24/7's rankings, and they also have Donovan Jackson, the offensive guard out of Texas, who is the number 10 player in 24/7's own rankings. So in this dream world for the Buckeyes of landing 3 guys that some people expect them to land, Ohio State could have 5 of the top 10 players in the nation. Tom, your thoughts?
Seems good. I don't follow recruiting very closely. Is that good? That seems like a lot. I don't really know though.
It is excessive. Yes, you're correct.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, we're talking about the number 1 player in the nation by 24/7's rankings, the number 3 player, the number 4 player, the number 7 player, the number 10 player. They also already have a commitment from the number 12 player, Travion Henderson. So it wouldn't just be 5 of the top 10; it would be 6 of the top 12. That's not normal. You don't normally get 6 5-star kids in one class. That's pretty remarkable, because you look at some of the other guys who Michigan has a 5-star quarterback commit, J.J. McCarthy. He's he's not a 5-star in 247's numbers, but he's a 5-star in the composite. And now that Ohio State is loaded at running back, they're probably the favorite to land Donovan Edwards, who's an in-state running back, who's another 4 or 5-star player. So they could have 2 5-star players, which could be a huge haul from them, and then they could be falling. That could be their best top of their recruiting class in years and years and years, and it would just mean they're falling further and further behind Ohio State. Like that might get them back up past Penn State, maybe if they can continue that. But yeah, it's just completely absurd. And Clemson has had some classes like this recently. Alabama had classes like this a few years ago. And that's what you need. Like, you need a class like this. And then that for 2 to 3 years basically puts you in unless something goes catastrophically wrong, you're probably a college football playoff team. Like, with that much talent on the team, if you kind of keep the culture strong within the program, that basically puts you in the spot where something would have to go really wrong for you to not at least make the college football playoff. And then once you're there, you have the talent to go head to head with whoever is on the other side of the field with you.
And you look at how Ohio State cashed in their 2 playoff runs were, I don't want to say the product of, but the product of 2 ridiculous recruiting classes. The 2014 team had the 2013 recruiting class of Von Bell, Jalen Marshall, let's not forget about his impact, Joey Bosa, Eli Apple, Ezekiel Elliott, JT Barrett, Garyon Conley, Billy Price, and I'm just scrolling through here. I mean, even Corey Smith, Tyquan Lewis, Darren Lee, and all of those second-year guys that took over that 2014 team and really made it what it was. They were instrumental. Then you go to the 2017 team, or the 2017 recruiting class that made the playoffs last year. That's Chase Young, Jeff Okuda, Baron Browning, Sean Wade, Wyatt Davis, J.K. Dobbins, Josh Myers, all of these guys starters, Tate Martell, all of these guys starters.
Most of these guys starters.
Pete Werner, Thayer Munford, Blake Haubiel. If you can get one of these once in a blue moon recruiting classes, or I guess once every 4 years, 5 years recruiting classes, it does set you up a year or two later for you to max out that roster. And it raises everybody else up because the rest of your roster is then competing against these guys. It fills in any gaps where you're missing stuff, and I mean that's why you're recruiting. You're trying to fill areas of need, and if you've got 15 top 100 players, which Ohio State may wind up with, and they're 25 players, that's a lot of Flex Seal, fill up these nooks and crannies so there's no leakage there, and if when you just add these classes to classes, then you don't necessarily have to wait for the 2021 class to be second or third year players. They're ready to hit the ground running because the 2019 and 2020 classes were impressive as well. And that's when you have this machine that starts rolling downhill and takes everybody out. And you mentioned, Alabama was doing it forever. They're still doing it. Clemson has some ridiculous defensive line classes. And then they develop guys like Isaiah Simmons and those lesser players that become stars. And there's arguments on Twitter all the time about recruiting or development, or recruiting versus coaching. And really, you need all three. It starts with recruiting, but it also helps to develop the Isaiah Simmons and the Darren Lee, because Ohio State isn't winning a national title without Darren Lee, just like Clemson isn't winning a national title without Isaiah Simmons.
Right. Yeah. Having all the talent and not developing it or not coaching it well, like that's how you're Miami, or that's how you're the post Pete Carroll era USC.
Texas.
Yeah. Well,
aside from
Texas Texas anytime post Vince Young, yes. Yeah, under Mac Brown or Tom Herman or Charlie Strong. Like, it's you have Texas A&M is like that a lot. Like, they've been recruiting pretty well, and the Kevin Sumlin era at Texas A&M, they recruited pretty well, and it just never, like, it was just, oh, well, they're 8-5 again. How about that? And you look at his program at Arizona now, it's like, oh yeah, it turns out he's not a very good football coach. How about that? That's interesting.
Who knew?
Yeah, who knew? Yeah, you have to have the talent. Like, we've talked about the concept of the blue chip ratio on the show before, but it's a concept that was pioneered by a recruiting writer named Bud Elliott, where you basically need to have more than 50% of your roster made up of 4 or 5-star recruits in order to win a national championship. Having your roster made up of more than 50% of them does not guarantee you will win a national championship, but if you don't have it, it pretty much guarantees you that you won't, because you don't have the margin for error where if your one really good running back gets hurt, you don't have another guy who you can plug in there, or your one really good quarterback gets hurt, you don't have another guy you can plug in there. And you need that talent all the way across the field. When you have that talent and you develop it properly, that's how you get a 2019 Ohio State football season where, they went through the regular season and just completely obliterated everyone. Like, they played a pretty good Cincinnati team and it was 42-0. They played good competition all season and just annihilated them. And that's how that happens, is you have so much better talent than everyone else does. And also it's well coached and the players are well developed and they're in a good strength program, and that you've got smart offensive and defensive coaches running, good systems, and you've got smart players who are smart enough to run those systems. Like, it all has to come together like that to have, that's how you are Clemson just killing people every game in the ACC, or Alabama killing people in the SEC when your quarterback isn't hurt. That's how that happens. And that's how, when you get to the playoff, you actually have a chance to win games. Oklahoma is an example of, they recruit pretty well and they'll get to the playoff, but then every year they go to the playoff and they lose. Oklahoma has made the playoff, 5 times and never won a game. They're 0-4, 0-5, something like that. Yeah. It's because they don't quite have the talent, especially on the defensive side of the ball, that all those other teams do. And, Clemson is an unbelievably talented team, and Ohio State should have won that game. I mean, Ohio State was, I think, probably pretty clearly the better team that night, I think, and just had, they needed 10 different things to go against them, and those 10 things all did. But, that's how you get to the playoff, and that's how you have the talent to actually win those playoff games.
Yeah, and then as you get players injured, the better players just, next man up, and the depth that Ohio State has been able to build has been just such a difference, because, Michigan State would have their good years as long as they stayed healthy, but it's the depth that separates everybody. When you look at University of Cincinnati, they've got some good players. It's one line of it. Whereas at Ohio State, it's, 3 lines of it, and the 3rd and 4th lines don't really get in until things are ugly. And the depth that Ohio State is creating right now through this recruiting is just putting such a distance between them and everybody else in the Big Ten. And I don't know how that changes, because for one, they have the best recruiting base. Ohio State does. There's no other Ohio. Pennsylvania is close, but I think for Penn State, the good thing about Ohio for Ohio State is Columbus is getting bigger and better and has overtaken Cleveland as one of the top 2 areas for producing talent. Whereas, like Penn State, I think Philly is doing some good things, but I don't know that necessarily that's Penn State territory. And Penn State territory in the state, there's not a lot around it. And then when you lose the top guy in that area this past season in Julian Fleming, like the recruiting base that Ohio State has, and the fence is ridiculous. And so how do you compete against that? You almost have to do what Herb Brooks did, and maybe what Mark D'Antonio did, is you just build a team to beat Ohio State. And how do you do that? And you devise a recruiting plan. Like either your goal is to win 8 or 9 games, or your goal is to beat Ohio State. And I think at this point, Tom, if your goal is to beat Ohio State and you don't recruit to that, you just try to maybe be like, well, we'll just try to pump up our program as best we can and go about that. Like you won't be able to catch them like that. You've got to like target areas where you think you can take advantage of Ohio State and recruit to that. And maybe that's not how you catch Ohio State, but that's how you beat them once every 3 years, twice every 4 years. Michigan State showed that it is not impossible. But 1, you have to defend. 2, you have to be good with the football. You're careful with the football. It's timely, I guess. And so far, that's not been what Michigan has been. But I think Michigan has a chance to, in Penn State, just recruit smartly and maybe target it towards somehow contending and finding Ohio State's weaknesses and going from there. Because I think we know right now, Ohio State, you can kind of see what they are. You know what they are. And maybe, although there's this constant evolving going on with Ohio State's offense and defense, maybe I'm trying to simplify it, but I think maybe you need to target Ohio State in terms of how do we recruit rather than just let's make our team as good as possible, because you're not going to catch Ohio State.
Right. Well, you have to put yourself in a position where you have one thing you do exceptionally well. Yeah. Michigan's just like they're fine. They're good. Like they don't have a terrible defense. They don't have a terrible offense. They're just fine. They're just like a solid B, maybe a B plus sometimes in some spots, but it's like they're just a solid B. And you have to give yourself like the puncher's chance, where it's just like, be like the service academies, and you do this one thing and you run the triple option really well, and then you're just a pain in the butt to play. And you do that, and then, hey, you can go into Michigan Stadium with vastly inferior talent and really scare the heck out of them. Or you can go to Oklahoma and scare the heck out of them like Army has the last couple of years. And I'm not suggesting that Michigan start running the triple option, but you have to do something that's just like you have this one thing that you do so well that you have to have something like that. Because otherwise, just being a solid B is like, well, if they overlook the game, if Ohio State overlooks the game, then you've got a chance. Because that's like what Iowa did a couple of years ago. Ohio State just came in flat, and Iowa played great, and and then you catch them off guard, and that works. Ohio State's never going to overlook the Michigan game, so that's not a viable game plan for Michigan. You mentioned it was interesting while you were talking. I looked up the Pennsylvania recruiting, because Penn State has done a pretty good job recruiting, but in 2021 they are getting killed in Pennsylvania, because Ohio State obviously has two of the top 5 players in Pennsylvania already committed: Kyle McCord, the quarterback, and Marvin Harrison Jr. from who's a wide receiver. From St. Joseph's Prep in Philadelphia, both of them. They also have a teammate, Jeremiah Trotter Jr., who is a linebacker. He's the number 3 player in the state. He's already committed to Clemson. So there are 3 of the top. There are only there's 4 of the top 10 players in Pennsylvania are committed. None of them are committed to Penn State, and Penn State only has a crystal ball for 2 of them, 2 of the top 10. So Penn State's kind of losing in Pennsylvania right now, and that's not the case with Ohio. Ohio, the Buckeyes have done a very good job of, outside of a couple very, notable exceptions. Ohio State, if they want a kid in state, they generally will get them. Ohio State has commitments already from the top 5 kids in the state of Ohio for 2021. I mean, that's just, and they will have guys who they don't get. They did not get Lorenzo Styles Jr., wide receiver. He's going to Notre Dame in 2021. They didn't get Jackson Carman a couple of years ago. But for the most part, Ohio has just been, if you're one of the best players in Ohio, you go to Ohio State. That's just how it is. and Penn State has not been able to do that, and that's been another. Their talent base is not necessarily as good as Ohio's in some years, but if you can't even maintain your in-state talent, Michigan's running the same issue. You're falling further and further behind.
Yeah, and as you said, you can say the same thing about Michigan, and even like Derek Davis out of Gateway, who's a linebacker safety. There's some people think Ohio State has a really good chance with him as well, and at this rate, Penn State might get one of the top 10 in Pennsylvania, which would, I don't want to say be devastating, but it's devastating because this is where, like, imagine, and we don't need to go too much farther, but like, just imagine that's your garden outside. That's where you get stuff for dinner, and it's got the best corn. And that's where you just, when you need it, you go get it. And now your neighbors put up a fence around it and you can't even access your own garden. And instead there's a sign that says, yeah, go to the Walmart in New Jersey, see if you can find something there. Go to Kroger in Maryland, see if you can find something there. And you're like, but I could just reach and grab some corn now. Now they're all going out of state. This garden here, this garden is going out of state. And that's when you're Penn State and you're already, as we know, pretty country. And not pretty as in beautiful. I mean, very country. Almost too country for some. Then you need to keep the guys who know what that country is like and is accustomed to it. That, like, they don't have to grow to appreciate it or whatever. They know what they're getting into. And maybe that's why they're leaving.
Well, I mean, recruiting is supposed to be the thing that James Franklin does well. So yeah. if you're not thriving there, that just makes the game management issues and all of that just worse. But yeah, I mean, that's you're supposed to build your class on your in-state kids. That's the foundation you build it on, and then you build around it, because you can't always count on pulling 3 kids out of Texas or 2 kids out of Washington or a bunch of kids out of Florida or wherever. You build your class with your in-state kids, and then you go and you pick, you find the individual pieces in other places. But you can't just rely on, well, we'll just go into Texas again this year and pull 3 kids out. That's not something you can do every year. So once you lose control of your in-state or your main recruiting base, that's where you start having problems. I mean, we've seen that with Michigan State, where Michigan State, as soon as Michigan State started losing all the kind of like second tier Ohio kids, the ones who are good players but don't have Ohio State offers, as soon as those kids started going to Kentucky instead of Michigan State, you started to see Michigan State fall off. And when Harbaugh kind of got things back under control within the state of Michigan, Michigan State wasn't pulling in-state kids, Michigan State wasn't pulling in Ohio kids, and then all of a sudden are not playing for not anywhere close to playing for a college football playoff berth anymore.
And sometimes there are just bad years in state where the things align and those guys just don't want to go to your school. And for whatever reason, looking at Penn State's recruiting class right now, they have 7 commitments. One of them is from Pennsylvania. He's the number 760 player overall. They do have one Ohioan, who is Liam Clifford, who is the brother of quarterback Sean Clifford. I assume he's the brother because he's from St. Xavier. And they've got 3 players from Michigan and 2 players from Maryland. And so they've got to start getting back into their own state. Although I think Alabama only has 1 commit at this point, so that gives you an idea of how early things are. But, Alabama will be just fine, Tom, to ease any of your concerns when it comes to recruiting. Although, maybe it's time to start shoveling the dirt on old Nick Saban. I believe he is 69 years old.
Yeah, I think he's got a few more nice years in him.
Okay. All right. Well, Tom, you got anything else before we wrap this one up?
I think we're good for now, and I'm sure we'll have more. At the rate we're going, there will be another commitment or 2 in the next 2 or 3 days, and we'll get to do another recruiting show very soon. Yep.
So we want to thank you all for watching. No, thank you all for listening.
Watching with your ears.
Thank you. I don't do senses so good. All right. So thank you all for listening. Make sure to check out theozone.net. Continue to listen to the shows, rate them, review them, and, we do appreciate your continued usage of our facilities. Please put the seat down when you're done. And, Tom, I think that's a great way to end the show. I think it's great.
Yeah, that's it. We're done.
All right. We'll talk to you guys later.
We could steal a car